Welcome back to another episode of the Jar Academy podcast. My name is Simi Gosling, and today we are talking about what it means to be soft in a relationship. We've kind of started to see this pop up all over Instagram and TikTok, and people talking about being soft. And I think it can get really misconstrued if you're not actually sure what it really means. Sometimes it's put aside with being overtly feminine or being girly or being really soft and small, but it's not performative. It's not self-sacrificing, and it's definitely not meaning we don't have boundaries. Being soft is a nervous system state, and it's a state where we ultimately learn to finally kind of breathe and let down our guard, particularly when we are triggered. We start to lean in with softness into the relationship. Instead of being reactive, we start to soothe ourselves and be curious. It takes a lot of nervous system work to learn how to begin to see the relationship and our own patterns and really soften into them and see what's behind them with curiosity rather than. It means our nervous system finally feels safe enough to let go of protection and lean into connection, even though that might still feel hard or vulnerable or tricky, because it's not a perfect human Barbie world state thing that we're aiming for here. It's more of a learning, and being soft in our relationships is going to change over time. When we're faced with more stresses in our life or when we're going through hardships, it's definitely easier for our guards to start to come back up. But overall, we really want to start to aim to be softer in our relationships for our own self. It's not about performing for someone else, but learning to finally let our guard down and be safe and present and connected in a way we kind of haven't felt before. Some examples of softness for you is when we can say how we feel without having to argue or prove a point. It's learning to be curious rather than critical. You don't assume the worst or try to control the outcome. You can listen to other people's points of view without the need to be right. Rather than being protective and bracing in our relationships, we really learn how to soften into them and the moment. We're constantly choosing or trying to choose to lean in. I think it's really important for me to note with this that softness doesn't mean not having boundaries, and it certainly doesn't mean not standing up for yourself or making your points feel known and heard and seen, but it's doing it from a place that is soft and kind and gentle and from a space of loving awareness rather than feeling the need to fight and prove and show that we are that kind of person. Becoming soft in our relationships is genuinely a really tricky one because our nervous system is so sneaky. I know that if you had asked me when I was really guarded in my relationships, if I was soft and open, I would have told you yes. Our nervous system and our subconscious likes to hide behind a trapdoor, behind a trapdoor, behind a trapdoor. And it takes a lot of awareness and really sitting with ourselves and learning to track our nervous system to actually understand where we are still bracing and where we are still having mirrors held up and where we are still holding walls up to try and keep ourselves protected. If we're not careful, there's many ways that we remain hypervigilant in our relationships if we're not careful and bring awareness to it. Really, learning to be soft in our relationships comes down to two key parts. And the first one is always with ourselves, right? If we don't know what safety in our body feels like, we don't know how to feel safe in our body when someone else is there. And often we think like, yeah, of course I feel safe in my body, but safety in our body really means like I can be in this present moment. I don't have to have things distracting me. I don't have to be, running away from my own thoughts and feelings. Feeling safe in our body means that we can be really present with ourselves without distracting ourselves. When we're wanting to work on our own safety and our body as an individual, this really comes down to, of course, learning to regulate our emotions and our nervous system. But it also comes down to learning to track when we are still trying to control certain outcomes or brace for certain failures that we might think are coming. It's learning to let go of control and learning to regulate our nervous system and understand that yes, we might be putting ourselves out there to be a little bit more vulnerable, and yes, that might hurt, but I know that I am here to support myself regardless of the outcome, and I can be proud of the way that I put myself out there and I learned to let someone in a little bit. Obviously, if you're hearing this can sound very scary, but I'm not saying that this is something that you do with everyone or just anyone. Obviously, like anything in a relationship, this is a dynamic. So you really need two people. You need someone that can meet you there as well, where it is emotionally safe to express your feelings. most of the time, and they are receptive to how you feel and attuned to what you are feeling. And if you're listening to this and you're like, I'm in a relationship and I just don't know if that's where my partner is at, things aren't going that great with us, and this is something we're really struggling with, stick with me, because at the end of this, I'm going to give you guys some tips on how to work through this as an individual and how to work through it in a relationship so that you can start to make some changes and hopefully move towards a bit more softness in your relationships. I know when I got into my first healthy relationship, my relationship with softness was challenged once again. I thought I had done so much work around regulating my nervous system, and I had done all the inner work, and I knew all the attachment style stuff, and I thought like I'm so good to go. And while I definitely had made some major changes in learning to use soft startups and being more curious rather than reactive and asking instead of assuming and working on all these main aspects, one massive thing for me is I always thought that I knew how to do it better. And it actually wasn't about how I did it or that it was better, because there's a million ways to do anything, right? It's not one way is the right way. But it really came down to a really subconscious thing in my mind where I was still trying to have some kind of control, because if my way was better and I could control it and I was in the outcome, I wasn't really allowing and being open to receiving from that person. Instead, it was like looking for ways that they failed because they didn't do it how I wanted it to be done. And the craziest part about this was consciously I wanted and actively looked for a partner who could lead more and not leave me to managing myself and the relationship and my emotions and their emotions and, taking all the planning and everything on my own back. And I actively sought that out. But when it was still presented in front of me, the old part of me that didn't know any different, the old part of me that was like, had this story and this belief, like I have to do everything on my own. And if I don't do it, no one else is going to do it. And this real hyper independence, self-limiting belief story that did serve a purpose once upon a time, but was now outdated as I had someone in front of me who was willing to meet me where I needed to be met, was kind of controlling the show. And in result of that, my own actions and behaviors sometimes weren't the best because I was frustrated and angry and no, you're not doing it right, and being very critical because I was trying to protect a part of me. And in doing that, I was actually damaging someone who wanted to help me and wanted to protect me. Now, here's a really tricky thing with softness. There is like this huge assumption that I just need to meet someone who is big enough and leads enough and takes control enough that I will then be soft and all of this will go away, and it's about someone else giving me that power to be soft. But the truth is, if we don't know what softness feels like in our own body, and we don't know what softness is or how to relinquish letting go or giving up control, then we ultimately get stuck in then even when we are presented with it, we are going to fight it. Like I did in my own story, we are going to resist being supportive, resist being held, and people will sometimes point that out to you a few times, but when it starts to become repetitive, they start to kind of give up because they don't want to be met with friction. Our nervous system will always pick an unfamiliar hell over a familiar heaven. So even though we might consciously want these things, it's not until we learn how to start embodying some of this that we actually make any kind of change towards allowing and welcoming that in and receiving it. I know that there's a lot of men in heterosexual relationships that will always say that they want a soft partner, and it's the exact same thing, right? We cannot expect to meet a girl who is soft enough that makes us become emotionally safe and stable. It comes down to being soft and feeling safe. And if we don't feel safe in our relationships emotionally, it becomes very hard to become soft because we feel like we have to protect ourselves from something. We still feel like we have to take control. And that's where it gets a little bit tricky. And I think like anything in our relationships, it's very easy to point the finger at the other person. It's so much easier to do that than to reflect on our own stuff. Because even like I just said with emotional safety, that's not necessarily just the man's role so that the woman can be safe. It all becomes this continuous dynamic where we're both kind of actively choosing to lean in and also reflecting on our own behaviors of maybe where we're not holding the container well enough for the other person to do what they need to do to kind of reach the dynamic that we want. So if you're listening to this and you're like, that's amazing, that sounds great, Sim, but what do I do about it because I feel very tense or I feel very rigid? Go back and listen to last week's episode because I did speak a lot last week about wired for protection, and that can really help us kind of figure out our nervous system if this is a very new concept to you and where you might be in a bit of a negative sentiment override. However, if you have worked through a lot of your past stuff and you're like, I'm ready, I just kind of finally need that last little bit of a push, I've written a list for you guys. I've written a list of 3 things that you can do on your own and 3 things you can do in your relationship or dynamic if you're wanting to start to be able to be more soft and present. So if you're working with becoming soft and safe within yourself, number 1, track your tension patterns. This is the biggest one. If you don't have the mind-body awareness to notice like where you're tensed and only kind of going by what you emotionally are reacting, it becomes very difficult because your body will always react before you consciously know what's going on. Think of it as me walking down a hallway, someone jumps out and scares me, I scream before I even know who it is or what happened, etc. So we want to learn to start tracking into our nervous system and tracking into the patterns within our body. One of the best ways that you can do this is really notice like when you are bracing. Like if you right now listening to me felt into your body, where are you holding tension? Where are you holding more than you need to? Where can you let go a little bit more? Where can you start to relax? What is the expression on your face? Can you relax your forehead? Can you relax your jaw? Are you holding your breath? Are you breathing into your belly? All of these little things that start to help us bring awareness to our nervous system and where we're bracing is really, really important because that is our body communicating with us when something doesn't feel safe. If something happens in the relationship, I don't feel safe. It's not just about the emotional reaction. It's my body's way of talking to me, of going, that there's something there that I have not processed and this feels unfamiliar and I don't like it and we need to go and work on this and process it. So your body and its tension patterns will be the biggest communicator for you for helping you see where you still aren't free. Number 2, practice micro letting go. Let someone else decide the dinner plan. Let a task stay undone. Start rewiring your system by practicing of what it feels like just to let go a little bit. If you're always the one that's the organizer, if you're always the one that has to do everything, just for this one time, don't. Address what comes up in you. Feel that discomfort that comes up in you. Let that be the outcome of what needs to happen. Now, obviously don't do this if it's like a very important task, but in little ways that it might feel safe to do so, just practice what it might be like to not have to be the one who's hypervigilantly in control all of the time. Number 3 is start to distinguish between what is safe and what is familiar. Sometimes when we feel a resistance come up, we start to think like, oh, this isn't safe, this isn't da-da-da. Ask yourself, is this unsafe or is it that it's just unfamiliar? And learn to start to distinguish between the two, because it's always tricky when we can't distinguish between what is actually happening in the present and what is the story of the past. Okay, but what if you're in a relationship and what if you are wanting to bring in some more softness into your dynamic? I know it's so easy to look at our partner and be like, hey, this is about them. They don't make me feel safe enough. They don't make me feel soft enough. And there is an aspect of that I'm going to be honest with you, that might be true, because it might not be someone who has the emotional capacity to make you feel safe in your relationship. And that's something that is a challenging conversation to have, but one that you need to distinguish. But in saying that, there is a way to see if we can try to shift our dynamic. And ultimately, it does really start with us. Number 1, audit your own hardening patterns. Where do you go into defense, control, and correction? Be honest without judgment to yourself. Once we start to see where we might be actually leaning into creating a dynamic that doesn't feel emotionally unsafe, we start to kind of set an example of what we're now wanting to change, what we're wanting to shift. And we can take ownership and come into a conversation and go, hey, like I realize that in this moment I'm being very hard and I'm being very constricted and I'm tensing up and it's coming out, as criticism and contempt, and I'm really sorry about that. Then we are having a conversation from a place of defenses down and a place that is about ownership of our own behaviors and emotions. Number 2, have conversations outside of conflict. It's so easy to not talk about this stuff and allow it to be, and then, it comes up and you feel yourself get hard again, or you get frustrated because you're not feeling how you want to be feeling in your relationship, and then you kind of snap at this person and it all comes bleeding out sideways, but nothing actually ever changes because we're already activating these defensive parts of ourselves and their defenses as well. The nervous system is more open when we are not in self-protection mode. So we're wanting to have conversations where that person is open to being influenced and how things are impacting us and the change that we're ultimately seeking. Number 3, remember that the right people will want to support you. but only if we communicate it in a way that is healthy and constructive and done outside of conflict. When we are open with our heart and sharing about something, particularly about creating a dynamic that feels softer and kinder and is from a place of taking ownership, then obviously the right people are going to want to meet you there. That is it for today's mini episode, and hopefully you guys have learned a thing or two about starting to welcome in a little bit more softness into our lives. I do just want to finish this episode off by really stressing to you guys that this is a forever work in process. There is no point where you magically reach this genie version of being this soft, open lover girl 24/7, because so much happens in our lives and stresses happen. And the more we are pushed in our nervous system, the more rigid and closed off we can become again. And it's not about shaming yourself if you feel that coming up for you. It's just about noticing where you're at and noticing about what's coming up for you and gently walking yourself back. What can you introduce into your life and into your practice that might be able to help bring in some softness for you? I know recently I have been super stressed out for work, and my soul has just been calling me back to my yoga mat, which has just felt really good because it's been over a year that I've even been on a mat. So all about adaptation, my loves. Anyway, that is it for this week's episode, and I will see you guys next week.